Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys Football, continuing to work through these transfer portal classes, evaluate them, grade them out, and we're heading to the king of the transfer portal, transfer to the SIT, the Ole Miss Rebels, who brought in another big class. Dill, we're going to talk a little bit, and for the Ole Miss fans, I'm interested to hear their takes on this, about the merits of taking big transfer portal classes while the high school classes remain small. This is an idea that I was kind of down on 2 years ago. But as you see the transfer portal just become full of young talent, like this seems to be a recipe that it's worked for Lane Kiffin, and it could work for some other programs as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, before we do again, just want to say thank you to you guys. Just so much support for the transfer portal talk, for high school recruiting. You guys have been awesome. Over 5,000 subscribers on the channel. Can't thank you guys enough. So again, if you do enjoy the content, lock in, subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you can support the fellas. And we really do appreciate it, Dill. I'm going to kick this one off to you. Let's have the conversation about how Lane Kiffin is going about developing this Ole Miss roster and continuing to hammer the transfer portal.
Yeah, and you can count me too as a skeptic of doing it the way he's doing it.
Yes.
For sure when he first started. The one caveat, though, is I didn't think this many young guys with as much talent as they have would end up in the portal. Like if you were to ask me, like guys like Bear Alexander or some of these kids from Alabama coming out as like true freshmen.
Chris Marshall's a phenomenal example. Like a guy that's super talented, 1 year of college football, and now he finds himself in the transfer portal. And obviously, Ole Miss gets him, doesn't work out, he gets kicked off the team. But that's an example of basically using the transfer portal almost like high school recruiting, because this guy's essentially in a high schooler who redshirted or maybe played a couple of games during his freshman year, but is young and is talented and is a guy that you can get on your roster and be there for a couple of years in the future and be a developmental guy.
Yeah, so that kind of changes almost well, you can probably do it what Lane's doing. And I will say, I think he's got to crank up that top end level of his high school recruiting, like what he's doing in the 23 class with guys like Suntrain Perkins, Naden Williams, top 100 guys. I think if Ole Miss is going to break through, they probably got to add like one or two more of those guys per class than what they have in this year in 23, where this is kind of the class I think they need out of the high school ranks if they're going to build a championship.
Yeah, maybe it has to do with like, okay, we're going to maybe just find some sleepers, some gems, some diamonds in the rough, like a guy like Quinshawn Junkins, who came in as a 3-star and was a true freshman All-American. Like, there are plenty of talented guys that are 3-stars that you can go find, and I trust Lane Kiffin in his talent evaluation to find those guys, but maybe take a little less of like developing that depth of the class and really go after some of those more top 100 guys in terms of getting them on campus, getting visits, and making them feel like a priority, because then it does really seem like it's a recipe that's worked. And quite frankly, what Lane Kiffin's done with this Ole Miss roster and team the first 3 years, it's been working. So it's kind of hard to knock it because they're winning a lot of football games and the talent is getting better within the roster. Getting into what they did in the transfer portal this year, we got to start with the quarterback position, bringing in Spencer Sanders, bringing in Walker Howard. I think a lot of Ole Miss fans were skeptics about bringing in 3 starting quarterbacks or bringing in 2 starting quarterbacks to one guy you already had in Jackson Dart. Dill, my take on this is you look across the country and so many teams like Florida, like Auburn, didn't have a single quarterback on their roster that they felt comfortable trotting out week 1. Ole Miss has 3. That's hard to do, especially in this day and age of the transfer portal. It's at the most important spot in football, the quarterback position. You have 3 guys who you feel comfortable about starting. I think that's a great start to talking about this transfer portal class.
Yeah, and to me, Spencer Sanders still a little puzzling that he's at Ole Miss. It felt like a weird spot for him to land because, well, I mean, they had a guy that started and played really pretty good football, I thought, in Jackson Dart. So he's not guaranteed to start there, that's for sure. He's going to have his chance and his opportunity to do it. I know you think he might be the guy, but
yes,
at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's for Ole Miss's sake, they're going to have a good quarterback starting week 1. That's all that matters to them. Yeah,
I agree. And then you have a guy in Walker Howard I think is going to start games in Oxford. I think he's extremely talented guy that that's another example. We said Chris Marshall. Walker Howard's another phenomenal example of a guy who's went to LSU for 1 year, was a top 100 recruit national, one of the best quarterbacks in that class, and then finds himself in the transfer portal. Like a young kid who you can get in, develop, and he might be ready for year 3 or year 4 as your starter. think he needed to bring in one quarterback. I do think it was puzzling that they brought in two, but man, do you feel good about what this quarterback room looks like? And Spencer Sanders accounted for over 9,000 offensive yards in his career, over 85 touchdowns. It's hard to find at the Power 5 level. He started since 2019. Pre-COVID, this dude's been starting football games. I think he's going to be the starter, and I think he's going to do a damn good job in Oxford. But you said it best. Whoever is starting is going to win that job, and you're going to feel good about whoever's trotting out. But Dill, whoever's starting, the offensive weapons that they brought in to replace a guy like Jonathan Mingo, Malik Heath, you feel pretty good about that too.
Yeah, and that's like in terms of complementing what they have, which is a lot of guys who can run really well, which they bring in a guy like Trey Harris, a big body, good contested catch guy, makes those kind of plays in the red zone when you need him. Caden Prescore and a tight end, dependable guy in the middle. I think what they were able to do is complement what they have, and again, give this unit, whoever's starting at quarterback, a good shot with a good group of weapons who can all do a bit of different things.
Yeah, I'm a fan of how this wide receiver, and we talk about this a lot, how it's important to get different kind of wide receivers and pass catchers into your roster, guys who can do different things. You have the flyers, you have the separators, you have the big bodies. I think Ole Miss has done a really good job. Now, a guy that they got in the transfer portal last year in Watkins, I think is going to have a breakout year. Very, very high on his game. But Trey Harris, I mean, the last 2 years, 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns. This guy scores touchdowns. He scores touchdowns in the red zone, which is something really important for Ole Miss, and how aggressive they are at not kicking field goals. So I think this would made a lot of sense. I think the pass catching group is very talented around whoever's starting at quarterback. And the next position I'm looking at is kind of that linebacker spot. You've seen Ole Miss go to this recipe a lot. Getting a guy who's played a lot of football at another school, has accounted for a lot of production, and then bring him here as a graduate transfer, a guy who's very experienced at that linebacker spot. They did it with Chance Campbell. They did it with Troy Brown last year. And now they're doing it with two guys in Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste and Monty Montgomery coming over from Louisville. It's probably my third position that I'm most excited for in this transfer portal class here.
Yeah, and again, you talk about it. Lane Kiffin's proven that recipe works for him. It works for Ole Miss. Although both those guys are probably going to have their shots at the pros. And again, you got guys now in Baptiste and Monty Montgomery, both really productive for a long time at their schools. They're not those transfer guys who are transferring out because they couldn't see the field or weren't getting their playing time. Yeah, these guys are transferring out to go kind of take that next step in their career, not the other way around, which again, you asked me 2-3 years ago what I think about the portal. Oh, it's just guys who can't play at their old school. Like, they're not going to go.
And that's what it was. And now it's not. And now it's guys who are like, okay, I graduated. I'm a fringe NFL guy. I can go shop myself around an NIL or whatever that may be and go kind of take that next step. And I think Monty Montgomery and Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste are two perfect examples of that. Those guys can ball, and now they're looking to ball out in the SEC.
Yeah, and again, it replaces a position that they just lost a guy. They executed that with Troy Brown. So it's pretty much, again, you talk about you're not going to bring in big high school classes. You need to go out there and get those kind of prized possessions in the portal, and Lane Kiffin seems like he can do that.
All right, last two positions we want to talk about in terms of filling holes. Start on the defensive line, the edge rusher position specifically. A spot that we feel like Ole Miss can get better at. I think I think Lane Kiffin and this personnel staff thought we could get better at, because that's what they go out and hammer. They get a lot of guys. Isaac Uku coming over from James Madison, probably being the most heralded guy. Hey, we're trying to get after the passer. We're trying to be a little bit more disruptive. They bring in a couple bodies who can make that happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you look last year, their leading sack guy had 4.5 sacks in Kari Crump. Like, that's just not quite enough, in my opinion. If you're going to have an elite defense, you kind of want your Will Anderson or your guy who's
Golden's done that. Exactly.
Take over a game. So to bring in a guy like Isaac Uku, I think was important, especially because they landed him late. Because if they didn't end up with him, I mean, you're looking at a position they really would have missed out on it in terms of building that edge position back up and getting some guys who can dependably rush the passer.
Yeah, and I like Jared Ivey. I like Cedric Johnson. I think those guys are good players, but we talk about this a lot. We talked about it on other podcasts. Like, having depth on the defensive line, especially when you're Ole Miss and your defense, just because of how fast your offense plays and how fast other offenses play in the SEC, you're playing a lot of snaps. Having defensive linemen who you can rotate and keep fresh throughout the whole game is important. I think Ole Miss saw that, and that's why they go out and bring 4 guys on the defensive line, and Isaac, Stephen Wynn, Akello Stone, and Joshua Harris that are going to be able to be fresher bodies, add depth to that position group. And then Isaac Uku's case, like maybe be the leading sack guy for Ole Miss heading into 2023.
They also are just going to add a fair amount of physicality. I mean, those aren't like a ton of proven defensive tackles, if you will, in terms of play time, but they're big dudes. I mean, that's again, you want to go stop the run against some of these teams that, and Ole Miss has probably been a bit of a finesse team for a lot of their time. They go up, load up on some big 320+ pound D tackles, and that, again, it just adds some pieces that they maybe were missing last year, as good as part of their defensive line was.
Yeah, and shout out JJ Pitt. I always forget how to say his name. JJ Pegas. He's gonna be a baller. I really like because he's another former transfer coming over from Auburn. So it's like that's a guy that I really like out of the high school or on Ole Miss's roster right now. Dill, the last position we'll talk about, and then we'll round this thing out, give our grades. That cornerback room, and you've seen a lot of it. Like length, size, that's king. And they bring in a bunch of guys who are 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", that have that length, that move well, and that have ball skills. I like how they did that, especially when you lose a guy like Davis and Igbinosin in the transfer portal.
Yeah, and that's the king of what teams seem to be looking for at this point, is big, long cornerbacks, and that's what they brought. And guys who are coming from smaller schools for sure, who necessarily haven't gotten their shot at playing competition like the SEC week in and week out, but have certainly proved it. And you look, they have the tools to do it. Now it's time for Golden and Kiffin and the rest of the Ole Miss coaching staff to get these guys ready to go play and possibly be draft picks if they can get there.
Yeah. All right. Let's round this out. Transfer portal grade. I give them a B+. That's what I have written down in my notes. I think they missed out on some guys that you would have wanted. Keon Coleman probably being the one. If you add Keon Coleman to the boat, like you're talking about A-, A territory, one of the best wide receivers in the portal. But when you can bring in 2 starting caliber quarterbacks in the same transfer portal class, already adding to another solid starting quarterback, like that's so important. You see so many teams that don't have quarterbacks. Ole Miss has 3. And so I'm probably giving them a B+. I think there could have been some more talent added on the defensive side of the ball, but a solid B+ for Ole Miss because they add some really important players at some important positions.
Yeah, and I don't mind that. I might be a little lower, maybe a B. Just, again, my issue is I think they could have done a better job addressing that edge position. And they do bring in Isaac Uku, certainly a good player, but I could have thought that 2 or 3 guys could have come in. And again, you just look, you gotta have guys who are getting more than 4.5 sacks.
And this is a good transfer portal class, but for what Lane Kiffin wants to do, like you need to have good transfer portal classes because you're leaving your high school classes small, you're turning over a roster. You have a lot of guys leave the program too every year. Like you need to bring in 16, 17, 18 quality players. That's just how Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin has decided to run this program. And so again, I think they did a solid job. I think Lane Kiffin's proven that this transfer portal attack has worked. I mean, you go 10-3, 8-5 in the SEC from kind of historic losing seasons under Matt Luke. I think you're feeling good about this 2023 season. I'm excited to see if Lane Kiffin continues to hammer the transfer portal the way that he's done. Again, we're going to close it out here. Appreciate you guys always for just supporting the fellas. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.